It started with a quiet house and a man who came home too early. Robert Mannion had been gone for a week, another trip, another promise to bring back something for his daughter. But when he turned the key that Thursday night, the silence felt wrong. No cartoons humming from the living room, no clatter from the kitchen, not even the faint rhythm of his wife humming to herself. Just stillness. The kind that makes your pulse pick up before you know why. He called out once. No answer. Her coat still hung by the door, her shoes were neatly lined on the rack, but her car was gone. On the counter sat a half-empty cup from the cafe near her office. Warm. Too fresh to be forgotten. That's when Robert's chest tightened. Where was Olivia? He checked the clock, 8:47 p.m. Their daughter, Claire, should have been home for over an hour. A quick call to aftercare confirmed his fear. She'd been waiting for pickup since 4:30. The staff member's tone said it all, confusion and mild concern. Something wasn't right. That's how Robert found himself driving through the empty streets toward his wife's office, headlights slicing through the dark like a question he didn't want answered. The building loomed ahead, glass, concrete, the usual mix of ambition and exhaustion. One light glowed faintly on the 12th floor. The security guard said someone was still working up there. Robert thanked him, pressed the elevator button, and tried to slow his breathing. He told himself he'd just surprise her, maybe even make her smile. He didn't know that in less than 10 minutes, his wife would be screaming for her life. The elevator chimed. The corridor smelled faintly of cleaning solution. A few janitors nodded as he passed. At the end of the hall, through the frosted glass of a meeting room door, he saw her. Olivia. Laughing softly. She wasn't alone. Kevin Markham stood close enough that the air between them seemed charged. Robert froze at the doorway. His mind scrambled for logic, maybe a late-night deadline, maybe nothing at all. But instinct doesn't need evidence. It only needs a heartbeat. When Olivia turned and saw him, the warmth drained from her face. The laugh stopped mid-breath. He stepped in. What's going on here? His voice came out quieter than he expected. Controlled, but sharp enough to cut through the space. Kevin opened his mouth, stumbled over an explanation that didn't sound like one. Olivia blinked rapidly, as if her body had forgotten how to move. And then she screamed. Not the startled kind that fades in a second. It was raw, panicked, the sound of someone who has just seen something they cannot process. She bolted from the room, heels scraping against tile, her name echoing in the corridor. Robert chased after her, confusion turning to fear, fear to dread. Kevin's voice followed, shouting something indistinct. When Robert reached her, she had thrown herself into a small storage closet off the hallway. Shelves rattled. She was shaking, eyes wide, whispering about something she'd seen, something Kevin had done. He didn't understand, not yet. But one thing was clear, this wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about danger. A husband walks in expecting quiet domestic routine and instead finds a scene that tears reality in half. How well do we really know the people we trust most? What began as an ordinary marriage would soon expose a chain of deceit, greed, and fear that reached far beyond the walls of one suburban home. And as the night unfolded, the question everyone would later ask was simple: what did Olivia see in that back room that made her scream? Robert Mannion had grown up in a quiet town just outside Albany, New York, the middle child in a family that measured love through effort, not words. His father was a postal worker, dependable and disciplined, and his mother managed a small bookstore. From an early age, Robert learned that responsibility wasn't something you claimed, it was something you proved. By high school, he was already the kind of young man who fixed other people's mistakes, the friend who stayed late after basketball practice to help clean up, the student who returned a lost wallet without a second thought. Stability was his anchor. He went to college on a scholarship, majored in finance, and spent his 20s chasing security the way others chased excitement. When he met Olivia at a friend's wedding, he wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he was the one who listened. She noticed that about him, how he paid attention when she spoke, how his questions felt sincere. Their relationship built slowly, without drama or grand gestures, and when they married 2 years later, everyone described them as steady. Robert liked that word. It meant predictable, safe, reliable. What he didn't realize was that to Olivia, those same qualities would eventually feel like distance. Olivia grew up in a different rhythm. She was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, the only child of a single mother who worked long hours as a nurse. Independence wasn't a choice, it was survival. By 15, she'd learned to manage bills, cook her own meals, and keep her mother's spirits afloat after grueling night shifts. That upbringing shaped her into a woman who carried competence like armor. She was sharp, articulate, ambitious. But underneath that polish, she carried a quiet ache for connection, a longing to be seen beyond what she could handle. When she met Robert, his calm was a relief from the chaos she'd known. He was the first man who didn't make her feel like she had to perform to be loved. For years, that steadiness grounded her. They built a home, welcomed their daughter Claire, and slipped into a comfortable routine: family breakfasts, neighborhood barbecues, Sunday church. But time has a way of turning comfort into silence. Robert's long hours in finance, the endless reports, the late-night calls, each one chipped away at the spontaneity that once drew her to him. Olivia didn't complain. She just worked harder at her own job, convincing herself that busyness was a kind of purpose. By the time she joined the tech firm in her mid-30s, Olivia was known as someone who could calm a crisis before it reached the boardroom. Her professionalism made her indispensable. Her smile made her approachable. But in private moments, waiting for an elevator, driving home alone, she sometimes wondered whether the version of herself she showed the world was the one she still recognized. That's when Kevin Markham entered the picture. Kevin was the kind of man who drew attention without trying. In his mid-30s, with a sharp sense of humor and an easy charm, he could make the most tedious office task feel like a shared adventure. Originally from Chicago, he'd moved around often, taking on project roles in different cities. He described his past vaguely, as though it wasn't worth unpacking. His colleagues found him magnetic, ambitious but approachable, bold yet funny. Olivia found him refreshing. Where Robert's quiet nature felt distant, Kevin's energy filled the air. Their working relationship began innocently. Kevin had joined her team on a high-pressure project, and his enthusiasm made late nights feel less like obligation and more like collaboration. He listened when she vented about workload stress, complimented her leadership, remembered small details. It was subtle, the way boundaries shifted, a shared lunch here, a casual message after hours there. It was never planned. But slowly, Kevin became the voice she looked forward to hearing at work, and the thought that startled her most was how easily she justified it. For Kevin, the connection served a purpose. Beneath his charm was calculation. He had joined the firm not just for career advancement but for access. The company's client data systems were a goldmine, and Kevin had the technical skills, and audacity, to exploit them. He needed credibility, and Olivia, with her reputation and access to client files, was a perfect cover. Whether he sought her out deliberately or simply recognized the opportunity later, only he knew. What's certain is that their closeness gave him exactly what he wanted: trust. Claire, their daughter, was the one pure constant in all of it. At 8 years old, she had Robert's quiet curiosity and Olivia's sharp mind. She'd often crawl onto the couch between them, nudging them closer without realizing she was bridging a widening gap. Her laughter softened arguments before they started. To her, they were just mom and dad, ordinary, dependable, hers. Around them, a few key figures shaped the unfolding story. Margaret Hall, Olivia's friend and confidant from the firm, had sensed something was off. She once told Olivia, "You work too late for someone who doesn't need the money." Robert's colleague, Dennis, noticed his friend's exhaustion and urged him to take time off. Even Kevin's roommate, a quiet IT contractor named Josh, later admitted he suspected Kevin was running a side hustle, but never knew how deep it went. Each of them saw fragments of the truth, but no one could piece together the full picture. Not yet. Robert wanted to protect what he built. Olivia wanted to feel alive again. Kevin wanted control. 3 lives, different motives, one night that would tie them together in ways none of them imagined. It was late October, the kind of evening when the air carried a hint of frost and the city lights looked sharper against the cold. The Manions lived in a quiet townhouse community just beyond the city limits, a neighborhood where mailboxes gleamed, lawns were trimmed, and neighbors waved out of habit more than warmth. Theirs was the last house on a narrow cul-de-sac, the kind that seemed built for privacy. Inside, it smelled faintly of vanilla candles and old carpet cleaner, a scent Olivia found comforting. For Robert, it just meant home, routine, predictable, safe. But safety has a way of turning thin when no one notices the cracks. In recent months, Robert's schedule had grown chaotic. He left before sunrise, came back long after Claire was asleep, and often worked through weekends. His laptop lived permanently on the dining table, its blue light painting the walls until midnight. Olivia had tried to talk to him once about it, but he brushed her off with the same tired reassurance, "It's just a busy quarter." He didn't see the quiet frustration behind her smile, or how often she stood in the kitchen after he left, staring at her reflection in the dark window, wondering when she'd stopped feeling seen. The tension began subtly. Missed dinners. Conversations reduced to logistics. A tone shift so slight it could be mistaken for exhaustion. Even Claire noticed, though she never said much. She'd watch her parents move through the house like strangers sharing a stage, close enough to touch, but rarely looking at each other for long. At Olivia's office, the contrast was striking. The firm occupied a sleek 12-story building with mirrored windows that caught the sunset in gold. Inside, it was all glass partitions, soft lighting, and the quiet hum of productivity. It was modern, efficient, almost too polished, like a place that wanted to hide its flaws. Olivia's department sat on the 12th floor, near the back where client files and internal servers were stored. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her a sense of control. She knew every inch of that space, every password, every protocol, every shortcut through the maze of meeting rooms. Until Kevin arrived. At first, his presence brought life to the dull hum of work. His laughter carried easily across the open floor, breaking up the monotony of deadlines. But over time, their late nights became a quiet ritual, lights dimmed, the rest of the office empty, and their voices the only sound above the soft hum of the air vents. It was the kind of environment that blurs lines, where familiarity grows too quickly, and where secrets don't stay hidden for long. Outside, autumn crept in fast. Leaves gathered on sidewalks, streetlights flickered earlier each evening, and a faint restlessness seemed to hover in the air. Olivia felt it too, a strange awareness that something was shifting, though she couldn't name it. Maybe it was the fatigue, or guilt, or the way Kevin sometimes lingered too close when he spoke. Maybe it was how her phone buzzed late at night with messages she didn't answer. The signs were there, scattered like small warnings. But life rarely announces when it's about to change. That Thursday night felt like any other, emails, deadlines, a quick text to Robert saying she'd be home late. Yet somewhere between the quiet office corridors and the darkened parking lot, the balance that held their family together had already begun to tilt. By the time Robert stepped into that building hours later, the stage was set, every detail in place, every emotion coiled tight, waiting for the moment it would all snap. Thursday had started like any other, emails, calls, quick meetings, the usual corporate noise. By the time the office began to empty, Olivia was still at her desk, eyes heavy from a day that refused to end. She'd promised Claire she'd be home before bedtime, but as the minutes slipped past 7, the deadline for the client presentation loomed. Kevin appeared at her doorway with his easy grin and an offer that sounded like rescue. "Come on," he said. "Let's finish it together. I'll order coffee." She hesitated, then nodded. Maybe 1 more hour. They moved to the smaller meeting space near the back of the 12th floor, a quiet corner most people forgot existed. The frosted glass blurred the hallway lights, and the only sound was the soft hum of the vending machine outside. On the table lay open laptops, papers, and the half-empty cups that marked too many late nights. For a while, it felt normal. Professional. She corrected slides, he checked formatting. They traded jokes about the client's impossible expectations. Then the conversation drifted, harmless small talk that carried an undertone she tried to ignore. Kevin leaned back in his chair. You ever think about leaving this place? Doing something for yourself? Olivia gave a tired laugh. Like what? I don't know, he said. You're smarter than half the people running this firm. You could do better. It sounded like flattery, but the way he looked at her made it heavier. She glanced down, pretending to focus on her screen. He leaned closer, his tone softening. You work too hard to feel invisible. For a second, she forgot to breathe. The air between them thickened, not romantic, not tender, just charged. She pushed her chair back, forcing a laugh. We should focus. It's getting late. Kevin nodded but didn't move away. Instead, he stood, walked toward the kitchenette, and reached for the light switch. The room dimmed, the shadows stretching longer across the table. There, he said lightly. Less headache from the glare. Olivia turned back to her laptop, pretending not to notice how close he was now. That's when she heard the elevator ding somewhere down the hall. A sound too faint for most people to care about, but enough to break her concentration. She froze. Kevin noticed. You okay? Yeah, she said quickly. Just thought I heard something. Moments later, the door creaked open. Robert stepped inside. At first, Olivia didn't register the figure in the doorway. Then she looked up and her entire body went still. Kevin turned, surprise flickering across his face. Robert, she managed, her voice catching in her throat. He stared at them both, confusion giving way to something deeper. What's going on here? His tone wasn't loud, it was quiet, deliberate, like a man trying to hold himself together. Kevin spoke first. Just finishing up some work, Robert. Big deadline tomorrow. Robert's eyes shifted between them. Looks like more than that. The silence stretched. Olivia could hear her own pulse pounding in her ears. She opened her mouth to explain, but nothing came out. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing against the counter. Something about the movement made Robert step forward. Don't, Robert said sharply. Kevin raised both hands. Easy, man. You've got it wrong. But there was something off in his expression, something Olivia hadn't noticed before. A flicker of fear. Or guilt. It passed too quickly to read. The tension cracked when Olivia whispered, Claire. The word escaped like instinct, her body already moving toward the door. She didn't know why she said it, only that she needed to get out. She bolted from the room, her heels striking the tile in sharp, frantic beats. Robert followed, calling her name. Behind him, Kevin shouted something, but the words were lost in the rush of adrenaline. Olivia turned the corner and ran toward the service area, a narrow corridor lined with storage closets. Her hands shook as she tried one door, then another, until one gave way. She stumbled inside, crashing into metal shelves. Something fell, a clatter that echoed too loud in the confined space. Robert reached her seconds later. Olivia. What are you doing? She looked up, face pale, eyes wide. He had something, she stammered. I saw, he tried to grab me. Robert's confusion deepened. What are you talking about? Before she could answer, Kevin appeared in the doorway. His expression had shifted, no longer defensive, just cold. You shouldn't have seen that, he said quietly. Robert stepped between them, instinct overriding reason. Stay away from her. Kevin hesitated, glancing down the hall, then back at them. You don't understand, he said, voice low. This isn't what you think. Robert's anger surged. You're done talking. Get out. For a moment, it looked like Kevin might argue. Then he backed away, slowly, palms up, retreating until the corridor swallowed him. A second later, the service elevator doors closed, leaving behind only silence and the faint echo of Olivia's ragged breathing. Robert turned back to her. What did you see? She pointed toward the meeting room. He opened something, a panel by the kitchenette. There's a room behind it. They returned cautiously. The door she mentioned stood slightly ajar. Behind it was a narrow utility space, barely wide enough for one person to stand. Inside were crates, cables, and a locked metal box. A keycard reader blinked faintly beside it. Robert frowned. This isn't part of the floor plan. Olivia nodded, trembling. He said it was just storage. Robert took out his phone and snapped photos, one after another. He didn't know what any of it meant, only that something felt deeply wrong. Within minutes, the night had shifted from marital confrontation to something far more complex. Olivia leaned against the wall, whispering apologies that didn't quite reach him. Robert said nothing. His mind was already racing ahead, to Claire, to the police, to the realization that this wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about whatever Kevin had been hiding. Outside, the city kept its rhythm, cars passing, lights flickering in office towers. But on that 12th floor, time seemed to stand still. The smell of coffee hung in the air. The laptop screens glowed with unfinished work. And between them, the trust that had taken years to build now sat broken, fragile, and surrounded by secrets. That was the night everything changed. The moment a husband's suspicion collided with a hidden crime, and one scream shattered the illusion of safety they both thought would last forever. When the police arrived that night, the 12th floor of the firm looked like the aftermath of a storm that had passed quietly but left damage in its wake. Security footage confirmed what Robert had told them. Kevin Markham had exited through the service elevator at 9:12 p.m., moments before building security responded to a call from Robert's phone. He hadn't returned since. Two uniformed officers took statements separately. One with Olivia in the break area, the other with Robert near the entrance. Olivia's voice trembled as she spoke, replaying the moment Kevin reached for the light switch, the sound of the panel opening, the flicker of fear that crossed his face before everything spiraled out of control. Her story was fragmented, more emotion than chronology, and the officer taking notes struggled to piece it into a clean report. Robert's version was calmer, measured, but every few sentences his jaw clenched. The words, "he touched her," and "she screamed," came out with a quiet fury that didn't need raising a voice. The investigators treated the situation cautiously. There was no immediate evidence of physical assault, no broken locks, no forced entry, just a strange hidden room, a missing coworker, and a marriage suddenly exposed under fluorescent lights. They taped off the kitchenette and storage panel, logged the metal box and cables, and photographed every angle of the office. The supervising detective, a woman named Elena Vasquez, was methodical but quick to sense that this wasn't just workplace drama. She noticed how the server equipment connected to the network, how the cables trailed under a cabinet instead of into standard ports. Something about it suggested intention. Someone had set up a private system inside a corporate network. The first hours were chaos. IT staff were called in, HR arrived in a panic, and the firm's legal counsel showed up demanding confidentiality agreements. Olivia, pale and shaking, was escorted out of the building under the pretense of medical distress. Robert followed silently, holding her coat as though that small act might still mean something. Outside, the night air felt heavier than before. He wanted to ask her what she hadn't said, but exhaustion sat on them both like weight. By the time they got home, their daughter was asleep at a neighbor's house, blissfully unaware that her parents had just stepped into something neither of them could explain. The next morning brought headlines neither of them expected. Data breach under investigation at local tech firm. The story broke faster than the company could contain it. Anonymous sources claimed confidential client information had been stolen, and a mid-level manager was under scrutiny. Kevin's name wasn't public yet, but internally, whispers spread like wildfire. By noon, his work account had been locked, his desk emptied by corporate security, and his apartment reported vacant. Detective Vasquez requested a second interview, this time at the precinct. Olivia arrived with Robert by her side, clutching a folder of emails and printed chats from her work phone. Vasquez thanked her for the cooperation, then went straight to the point. "You mentioned he grabbed your arm. Before that happened, did he ever ask you to access company files or systems outside your authorization?" Olivia hesitated. "He said it was part of a project update. He told me it was approved. I didn't think to question it." Vasquez leaned forward. "Did you ever see where the data went?" "No," Olivia whispered. "But, a few days before this happened, he asked me to copy client reports onto an external drive. He said the server backup was malfunctioning. That was the first real clue. When the IT forensics team examined the metal box from the storage room, they found encrypted partitions filled with fragments of client data, names, contracts, invoices. Kevin had been siphoning information for months. The system was cleverly masked to look like an outdated backup terminal. Whoever built it knew exactly how to hide inside corporate noise. For days, Olivia lived under a cloud of dread. Her company placed her on administrative leave, pending investigation, a phrase that sounded polite but felt like punishment. Friends stopped calling. Even her mother, who lived 2 states away, offered only strained comfort. "You just need to tell the truth and let them handle it." But truth had never felt so tangled. Every file she transferred, every after-hours meeting with Kevin, now looked like complicity on paper. Robert tried to hold things together. He took Claire to school, handled meals, made calls to lawyers, and fielded reporters who had begun showing up at their street. But inside, resentment simmered. Some nights, he sat awake replaying the moment he'd walked into that office, the way Olivia froze, the guilt in her eyes. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was humiliation. Yet despite his anger, he couldn't ignore the fear that she might be in real danger. 3 days after the incident, Kevin's car was found in a parking garage downtown. Inside were 2 phones, a laptop, and a duffel bag with clothes and cash. The laptop was wiped clean. The phones were encrypted, both linked to anonymous accounts. But one item stood out, a USB drive labeled simply, Claire. When Vasquez mentioned it, Olivia broke down in tears. "He met her once," she said through sobs. "At the office family picnic. He joked about how smart she was. I thought it was harmless." The detective's expression hardened. "We're going to analyze it. Until we know what's on that drive, I suggest your family stays somewhere secure." The tension inside the Mannion home became unbearable. Robert moved into the guest room. They spoke only about logistics, lawyers, schedules, news updates, but beneath the silence lived a deep unease neither could name. Olivia jumped at every unexpected sound. Robert checked locks twice before bed. The smallest noise, a car door, a text alert, sent their hearts racing. Weeks passed. The investigation widened, revealing Kevin's trail across multiple companies. He'd left each job abruptly, usually after gaining access to internal databases. The FBI got involved once the scope expanded beyond state lines. Olivia's involvement appeared increasingly unintentional, though some agents remained skeptical. The hidden storage room in her office had been used as a drop zone, a transfer point between corporate networks and an external system accessed from abroad. For a brief moment, it seemed the nightmare might be fading, until the red herrings began. A former coworker claimed she'd seen Olivia and Kevin arguing 2 nights before the incident. Another anonymous tip suggested Olivia had helped set up the hidden equipment herself. The firm's management, desperate to deflect blame, quietly leaked that she was cooperative but under review. The public turned cold. Online forums dissected every rumor, painting her as either victim or accomplice. There was no middle ground. Robert's faith in her wavered. Some days he believed her entirely, other days he questioned every word. Once, after tucking Claire into bed, he found himself staring at Olivia's phone on the kitchen counter, tempted to unlock it. He didn't, but the urge left him ashamed and unsettled. Meanwhile, Vasquez's team uncovered something that reframed the case. Among the encrypted files recovered from Kevin's hidden drives were recordings, snippets of phone calls, internal meetings, even private conversations from the office break room. It appeared Kevin had been recording Olivia for weeks, using her as unknowing leverage. One clip captured him saying, "She's too clean. If this goes south, she takes the fall." That changed everything. A month later, Kevin was found hiding in a motel near Cleveland. The arrest was quiet, but the discovery inside his room was not. Dozens of drives, falsified IDs, burner phones, and a notebook filled with coded entries linking him to data brokers overseas. He confessed partially, admitting to unauthorized transfers but denying coercion. When asked about the night of the scream, he claimed Olivia panicked after misinterpreting his actions. "She thought I was going to hurt her," he told detectives. "I wasn't. I just wanted to close the deal." For Olivia, hearing his recorded statement was both relief and torment. She was vindicated, but the damage had already been done. Her career was effectively over. Her reputation, shattered. Even as the charges mounted against Kevin, she struggled to reclaim normal life. She couldn't enter a dimly lit room without remembering that night. Robert watched her fade in slow motion. His anger softened into weary compassion. He still couldn't say he forgave her, but he understood now that she hadn't just betrayed him, she'd been manipulated. When the trial began, he sat behind her in court, silent, present. Their daughter's small hand rested in his. The investigation eventually closed with Kevin's conviction for corporate espionage, coercion, and unlawful surveillance. But for the Mannion family, closure was more fragile. Their story no longer belonged to them, it lived in headlines, in whispers, in the echo of that one scream that had changed everything. Even after justice was served, Detective Vasquez noted something in her final report that stayed with her: some crimes end with an arrest. Others leave behind a silence that never really goes away. For Robert and Olivia, that silence became part of their daily life, a reminder that the truth, once uncovered, doesn't heal on its own. It only waits, quietly, for what comes next. 6 weeks after Kevin's conviction, the case seemed closed. The firm had restructured, the press moved on, and the Mannion family tried, haltingly, to reclaim normal life. Olivia had started therapy, Robert had returned to work, and their daughter's laughter once again filled the house. Yet underneath the fragile calm, a question refused to die. One afternoon, Detective Vasquez called Robert directly. Her tone was measured, but there was something in it, a quiet urgency. "Mr. Mannion, we need you and your wife to come down to the precinct. There's been a development." When they arrived, Vasquez met them in a small conference room. On the table sat a laptop, a file folder, and a stack of printed photographs. She didn't start with pleasantries. "We've continued reviewing the digital evidence from Kevin's drives," she began. Most of it matched what we already knew: client data, correspondence, some surveillance recordings. But one of our analysts found a partition we missed before. It was buried under layers of false encryption. She opened the laptop and played a short clip. It showed Kevin in the office storage room, the same night of the incident, hours before Olivia and Robert had arrived. The footage came from a hidden camera, possibly Kevin's own. He was speaking on the phone, pacing in front of the metal box. His voice was clear. "Yeah, it's ready," he said. "The transfer finishes at 9. She's covering the access logs, doesn't even know it yet." The room fell silent. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. Robert froze. Vasquez continued quietly. That call wasn't to a client. It was to another employee, someone higher up. She slid a photo across the table. This man, Paul Denton, head of cybersecurity at your firm. He left the company a week after Kevin's arrest. We've confirmed he wired money to an offshore account in Kevin's name the day before the breach was discovered. Olivia shook her head in disbelief. Paul. He trained half our IT department. He said Kevin was trouble. He was, Vasquez said. But not alone. As the detective spoke, the pieces rearranged themselves in Robert's mind like shards of glass snapping into a new pattern. Kevin hadn't been the mastermind, he'd been the distraction. The perfect fall guy with just enough charm to draw attention away from the real architect. Olivia's late-night help hadn't just been useful to Kevin, it had covered Denton's tracks entirely. When Kevin panicked that night, it wasn't fear of exposure for his own actions, it was fear of Denton cutting him loose. Vasquez leaned back. We found deleted messages between them. Kevin was supposed to destroy the drives once the transfer was complete, but he tried to renegotiate for a larger cut. Denton shut him out. That's why Kevin stayed late. He was trying to access the system manually from the back room before the data lockout hit. Robert exhaled slowly. So the whole thing, the affair, the data theft, it was all just part of a bigger setup? Partly, Vasquez said. Kevin was guilty, yes. But he wasn't the one who built the scheme. Denton engineered it, using Kevin's access and Olivia's clearance to create the perfect digital smokescreen. When it fell apart, he framed them both. Olivia sat back, stunned. He used me, she whispered. Every file I touched, every code I entered, he knew. For Robert, the revelation hit differently. He had spent months wrestling with betrayal, guilt, and humiliation. Now, a colder truth replaced them, they'd both been pawns. The scream that night hadn't just been the sound of fear, it had been the first crack in a plan far more deliberate than anyone realized. Vasquez closed the folder. We've issued a warrant. Denton disappeared 3 weeks ago. But now that we know what to look for, it's only a matter of time. Outside, the air felt sharper, the world strangely quiet. Robert walked beside Olivia in silence until she finally said, all this time, I thought the worst thing I did was break your trust. But the worst thing was trusting the wrong people. He looked at her, tired, fragile, but honest, and for the first time in months, he took her hand. Then maybe we start from there, he said. The truth had changed everything. Kevin was guilty, but not alone. The real mastermind was still out there, and the story that began with a scream was far from over. Months passed, and the noise surrounding the case slowly faded. News outlets lost interest once the story stopped producing fresh headlines. Kevin remained in prison, serving time for his part in the data theft, while the search for Paul Denton continued across multiple states. Authorities traced him through a series of dummy corporations and offshore accounts, but he always seemed one step ahead. His name appeared briefly on an Interpol notice, and then nothing. He vanished, leaving behind a trail of confusion and unanswered questions. For the Mannion family, silence didn't mean peace, it meant learning to live with the fragments of what had been broken. Their days took on a fragile rhythm again, morning routines, school runs, family dinners that felt more deliberate than before. They weren't pretending anymore. Every conversation carried an undercurrent of honesty, even when the words came out clumsy or raw. Olivia found a new job at a smaller firm several towns away. She kept her title but not her old confidence. The office buzz, once thrilling, now felt like a reminder of how easily trust could be twisted into a weapon. She no longer stayed late. Her phone stayed on silent after 5. Colleagues noticed she kept to herself, polite but distant. In therapy, she admitted she still dreamt about the sound of that scream, the moment her world collapsed and began to rebuild itself in pieces. Robert, too, carried scars that didn't show. He'd gone from fury to numbness, then to something quieter, an uneasy kind of understanding. He didn't speak of forgiveness because the word felt too neat for what they'd lived through. But he stopped looking at Olivia as an enemy. Somewhere between police interviews and court hearings, he realized that both of them had been trapped by the same illusion, that good intentions protect you from harm. They don't. Awareness does. The revelation about Denton had stripped away the last of Robert's certainties. For years, he believed in order, the idea that if you worked hard and did the right thing, life would reward you with stability. But now he saw how thin that promise really was. Anyone could be blindsided. Anyone could lose everything in one bad moment. He found himself more protective of Claire, more cautious, but also more present. He started turning off his laptop by dinner, walking her to school instead of dropping her at the corner, asking questions that mattered. Sometimes, Olivia watched him and felt the ache of gratitude and guilt tangled together. The man she'd almost lost had become the one she finally understood. They spoke more now, not about the past but about the small details of life, the color of the sky at sunset, Claire's spelling tests, weekend plans. Their marriage wasn't repaired so much as redefined. The silence between them was no longer avoidance, it was rest. The trial against Kevin ended quietly. His plea deal included cooperation in identifying Denton's network, but his information led mostly to dead ends. Still, one file stood out in the recovered archives, a list of names and transactions that hinted at other insiders in different companies. The scale of it suggested Denton's scheme had been larger than anyone realized. Detective Vasquez filed a supplementary report, marking the case as active, multi-jurisdictional. It wasn't closure, but it was truth enough for now. On a gray February morning, Olivia visited the courthouse one last time to retrieve her personal files. As she stepped outside, she paused on the steps and looked out at the city. For months, those streets had represented everything she wanted to escape: shame, fear, exposure. Now, they just looked ordinary again. She took a slow breath and, for the first time in a long while, felt steady on her feet. That evening, at home, she found Robert in the kitchen making tea. Claire sat at the table, coloring. The warmth of the moment hit her harder than expected. No cameras. No questions. Just the quiet rhythm of a family that had survived something larger than itself. She sat beside Claire and asked what she was drawing. "It's our house," the girl said, smiling. "I added a garden." Robert glanced up, caught Olivia's eye, and smiled faintly. A small, genuine smile, the kind that doesn't erase the past but accepts it. Later that night, when the house was still, Robert stepped outside. The sky was clear, the air sharp. He thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the fear, the strange mercy of survival. There were still parts of the story that didn't make sense. Maybe there always would be. Somewhere, Denton was still out there. Somewhere, another family might be unknowingly walking into the same trap. But for now, Robert let that thought go. Not out of ignorance, but out of choice. He'd spent enough time living in what-ifs. When he came back inside, Olivia was asleep on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders. He sat beside her, studying her face, the woman he'd once thought he'd never trust again. Now, he saw her as someone who had fallen, fought, and chosen to rebuild anyway. The scream that began their story had long since faded, but its echo remained, not as a sound, but as a reminder. Life could change in an instant. Safety was an illusion. But truth, no matter how painful, was the one thing that made rebuilding possible. In the end, the Manions didn't find closure. They found something harder, and maybe more valuable: clarity. And in that fragile peace, they learned to keep living, not as the people they once were, but as the ones who had finally seen what lies beneath the surface of an ordinary life. Thank you for watching this gripping story of love, betrayal, and deceit. The Manion family's ordeal reminds us that danger doesn't always hide in dark alleys, sometimes, it sits behind a desk, wearing a friendly smile. If this story kept you on edge, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Twisted Family Crime for more stories that reveal just how fragile trust can be. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was Olivia a victim of manipulation, or did her choices lead her there? Drop your opinion in the comments below. And don't miss our next episode, where a quiet lakeside town is shaken when a missing child's case uncovers a chilling secret buried for 20 years. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story.